The sound was unexpected. On that August day in Nagasaki, not the roar of the bombs, not the echo of destruction, but something far more impossible, the silent weeping of men who had spent decades learning not to cry. It was a sound that shattered every rule of Eastern spirituality, a lament rising from the depths of their souls, tears falling like rain on sun-baked earth, each drop carrying decades of cultivated serenity, now undone in a moment of pure humanity. They were monks, Zen Buddhists, masters of serenity, and they were weeping for a man they barely knew, a Polish Catholic priest, Maximilian Kolbe, who had arrived only 6 years earlier. Have you ever seen a Zen Buddhist monk cry? It seems paradoxical, doesn't it? These men dedicate their entire lives to detachment, to acceptance, to transcending human suffering through inner stillness. But on that day, tears fell like summer rain on faces etched by meditation. And they wept for Maximilian Kolbe. There's a Japanese word you may never have heard, Mugenzai no Sono. It means the boundless garden. It's a Zen concept of spaces where boundaries disappear, where the self and the other become one. The Japanese use this word to describe what Kolbe had created in Nagasaki. But how could a Christian priest touch the Japanese Zen heart so profoundly? How could someone preaching about a crucified God make Buddhist monks weep his passing as if he were a bodhisattva? The answer will change what you think about religion, about love, and about the invisible barriers we build between ourselves and the sacred. Because what happened in Nagasaki between 1930 and 1936 was far more than a meeting of cultures. It was a revelation about the universal nature of sacrificial love, a discovery that took Zen monks decades to fully comprehend. And when they understood, they couldn't hold back their tears. Let me take you to that Japan of 1930, a country closed to the world, suspicious of any foreign influence, especially Christian. Japan was an island, spiritually as much as geographically. Centuries of isolation had created a culture that breathed suspicion of anything from outside. Christianity was tolerated, but as an alien presence, like an exotic bird in a gilded cage, viewed with curiosity, but never fully accepted. Maximilian Kolbe arrives at the port of Nagasaki on a spring morning. He is 36 years old, small, thin. He coughed up blood throughout the sea voyage. Doctors said he wouldn't live long, but there was something in his eyes that contradicted the fragility of his body, a quiet intensity, a presence that filled the space around him without making a sound, like a flame that warms without burning. The Japanese Christians who greet him at the port are nervous. They know that any misstep could bring persecution. The government tolerates Christianity, but doesn't encourage it. It's a fragile tolerance that can shatter with a wrong gesture, a misinterpreted word. Kolbe observes the mountains surrounding Nagasaki, the cherry blossoms in bloom, the Zen temples nestled among the hills like sleeping birds. And then he does something no one expected. Instead of establishing a traditional Christian mission, he buys land on the outskirts of the city, right next to a Zen monastery. The monks watch with curiosity this foreign priest. They see him working the land with his own hands, planting, building, without haste, without noise. Kolbe doesn't try to convert anyone. This is crucial. You need to understand this. In 6 years in Japan, Kolbe never made a single aggressive attempt at conversion, never criticized Buddhism, never proclaimed the superiority of Christianity. Instead, he simply lived, and the monks began to notice something strange. This Polish priest woke at 4 in the morning, just like them. He spent hours in silence, just like them. He worked with his hands in the earth, just like them. But there was something different in the quality of his silence. The abbot of the Zen monastery, Abbot Yamada, observed Kolbe from the wooden window of his temple. He had been a Zen master for 40 years. He had guided hundreds of disciples on the journey to enlightenment. But he had never seen a silence like Kolbe's. It was a silence that radiated, a silence that warmed, a silence that invited. Zen monks spend years learning to empty themselves, to dissolve the ego, to become transparent to the universe. Kolbe seemed to have been born transparent. There was an almost supernatural quality to his presence. When he walked through the gardens surrounding his small property, even the birds seemed to sing more softly. The flowers opened with more generosity. as if nature recognized in him something familiar, something that spoke the same silent language of creation. The monks observed this with a mixture of fascination and perplexity. How could someone from such a different tradition radiate the same peace they sought through decades of rigorous discipline? And then the first miracle happened. Small, almost imperceptible. It was winter, 1932. An unexpected blizzard had covered Nagasaki. The kind of storm that transforms the landscape into a white, silent sea. The mountains disappeared behind curtains of snow. The trees bowed under the weight of the accumulated flakes. The Zen monasteries, traditionally self-sufficient, were starving. Their rice reserves had run out 3 days earlier. The road to the city was blocked by snow, and Zen pride prevented them from asking for help. Abbot Yamada was meditating on the impermanence of life when he heard footsteps in the snow. It was Kolbe carrying sacks of rice. "I thought you might be needing this," he said in broken Japanese, bowing deeply. Yamada was confused, not just by the generosity, but by the way Kolbe bowed. It was a perfect bow, respectful, without any trace of condescension or superiority, as if it were natural for a Christian priest to revere a Buddhist temple. "How did you know we were starving?" Yamada asked. "I didn't know," Kolbe replied. I just felt it. I just felt it." Those 2 words echoed through the halls of the Zen monastery for weeks. The monks whispered among themselves, analyzed, debated. How had someone outside the Zen tradition developed this sensitivity, this ability to feel the suffering of others without needing to see it? What they didn't know is that Kolbe had spent the last 15 years of his life developing exactly that, not through Zen meditation, but through something he called Marian devotion. For Kolbe, Mary wasn't just the mother of Jesus. She was the symbol of total receptivity, of absolute openness to the sacred, the capacity to say yes to mysteries the mind cannot comprehend. He had spent years emptying himself before her, begging to become transparent, for his ego to vanish, and only love to remain. The Zen monks attempted to empty themselves through negation. Kolbe emptied himself through surrender, and the result, at least outwardly, was nearly identical. But Abbot Yamada began to suspect something deeper was happening. In the following months, he observed Kolbe more closely, not out of curiosity, but as a spiritual study, and he began to notice impossible patterns. Kolbe always knew when someone was suffering, not just in the Zen monastery, but throughout the entire city. Orphaned children appeared at his door without anyone sending them. Widows found baskets of food in their yards without knowing where they came from. It was as if he had a spiritual antenna tuned to the frequency of human suffering. And then Yamada discovered the secret. It was a spring afternoon, 1933. He was walking through the gardens of his monastery when he heard a voice coming from Kolbe's property. It was Kolbe, praying. But he wasn't praying in Latin, nor in Polish. He was praying in a language Yamada recognized immediately, the language of absolute love. The words didn't matter. It was the vibration, the intensity, the complete absence of ego in the voice. Yamada had heard that same vibration only once in his life, in the voice of his own Zen master, moments before he died. It was the voice of someone who had completely transcended the separation between himself and the universe. That night, Yamada did something he hadn't done in 40 years of Zen practice. He left his monastery, crossed the garden, and knocked on Kolbe's door. "May I meditate with you?" he asked. Kolbe smiled. It would be an honor, and so began the most unlikely friendship in Japan's spiritual history. Every morning at 4 o'clock, Yamada crossed the garden that separated the 2 worlds. He sat beside Kolbe in the small chapel the priest had built. It was a simple chapel, light wood, clean lines, almost Zen in its austerity, as if Kolbe had absorbed Japanese aesthetics without realizing it, or perhaps because true spirituality always finds the same forms, the same essential simplicity. Yamada meditated in silence, as he always had, legs crossed, spine erect. Deep, regular breathing. His half-closed eyes observed the interior of his mind, seeking the fertile emptiness where the deepest insights were born. Kolbe prayed the rosary, whispering Hail Marys in Polish. His fingers glided over the beads worn by use. Each prayer was like a sigh, like a surrender, like a deeper dive into the ocean of divine love. 2 completely different traditions, two spiritual languages that theoretically shouldn't meet. But in the silence between the words, something extraordinary happened. A communion that went beyond forms, a harmony that transcended theological differences. It was as if their souls spoke the same ancestral language, the language of pure love that exists before any religion is born. They discovered they were seeking the same thing, the total dissolution of the ego, the complete union with the Absolute, the capacity to love without reservations or conditions. The Zen called it enlightenment, Kolbe called it sanctity, but the experience was identical, and the other monks began to notice the change in Yamada. His face had acquired a different serenity. His eyes shone with a softer light. His teachings had become simpler, more direct, more filled with compassion, as if Kolbe's presence were polishing aspects of his Zen practice that he didn't even know existed. Other monks began to join the morning sessions, discreetly, curiously. They sat in a circle, Kolbe in the center with his rosary, the monks around him in the lotus position, and something magical happened in those silences. The boundaries disappeared, Catholic and Buddhist, Polish and Japanese, East and West. Everything dissolved in the same universal quest, boundless love, peace that surpasses all understanding, union with the mystery that is beyond all names. This is precisely what the Japanese called Mugenzai no Sono, the boundless garden. And Kolbe had created this garden without even knowing the word existed. But then something happened that tested this union in a way no one could have predicted. It was 1936. Japanese militarism was growing. The government became suspicious of any foreign influence, and especially religious. The clouds of war thickened on the horizon. Japan closed itself again, like a flower that retracts when it senses the approach of a storm. Foreigners were viewed with increasing suspicion. Christian missionaries began receiving official letters, polite but inflexible. Kolbe received an official letter. He had 1 week to leave the country. The news reached him on an autumn morning. The maple leaves were already red as blood. The air had that crystalline quality that precedes winter, as if nature itself knew that something was coming to an end. The news spread quickly through the Zen temples of Nagasaki, whispered in silent corridors, murmured among morning prayers, carried by the wind that passed between the temple bells, and for the first time in decades, the monks didn't know how to react. They had found something in Kolbe that they didn't know they were looking for, a form of love that transcended all theological differences. How to let this go? How to say goodbye to someone who had become a bridge between worlds? Abbot Yamada spent 3 sleepless nights, meditating, questioning, seeking an answer that could justify that separation. He found none. On the morning of Kolbe's departure, something unprecedented happened in Nagasaki. All the Zen monks in the city gathered at the port, not to protest, not to make noise, but to weep. And it was in that moment that they understood something that had escaped centuries of Zen philosophy. Detachment did not mean the absence of love. It meant the capacity to love without possessing. And Kolbe had taught them this without uttering a single word about Buddhism. You need to understand that for a Zen monk, weeping in public is breaking decades of training. It's admitting that something touched their soul so deeply that even years of meditation couldn't contain it. But at that port, watching Kolbe slowly ascend the ship's gangplank, they couldn't feign indifference, because this wasn't just a priest departing. This was a piece of their own enlightenment being taken away. Abbot Yamada approached Kolbe in those final moments. His eyes were moist, but his voice remained steady. "You taught us something we thought we already knew," he said in Japanese. "What was that?" Kolbe asked. "That true love has no nationality, no religion, no limits." Kolbe smiled and placed a hand on the old Zen master's shoulder. "You always knew that," he said. "I only helped you remember." And then something happened that no Japanese person present would ever forget. Yamada bowed before Kolbe. Not the polite bow of everyday Japanese life, but a profound reverence, the kind reserved only for the sacred, and all the other monks did the same. 40 men who had dedicated their lives to transcending the material world, bowing before a Catholic priest as if he were a living Buddha. In that moment, all theological differences became irrelevant. Catholic or Buddhist, Christ or Buddha, Hail Mary or Om Mani Padme Hum, it was all just different languages for the same fundamental experience, love that transcends understanding. Kolbe boarded that ship carrying far more than his few possessions. He carried the certainty that he had touched something eternal in the Japanese heart, and he left behind monks who would never be the same. But the story doesn't end at the port of Nagasaki, because what Kolbe planted in those 6 years would germinate in ways he couldn't have imagined. Let me tell you what happened in the following years. Yamada returned to his monastery, but his Zen practice had fundamentally changed. He began to teach something no Zen master had taught before, the meditation of active compassion. Instead of merely seeking personal enlightenment, he taught his disciples to meditate on the suffering of others, to feel the world's pain as if it were their own, exactly as Kolbe did. And something extraordinary began to happen in the Zen temples of Nagasaki. The monks began to leave their monasteries, not to preach, not to convert, but to serve. They created orphanages, cared for the sick, fed the hungry, without speaking about Buddhism, without mentioning enlightenment, just loving, as Kolbe had loved. The Zen tradition had found its missing dimension. Contemplation had married action, wisdom had married service, and all because of a Catholic priest who never tried to convert anyone. Can you see the divine irony in this? Kolbe had gone to Japan to bring Christ to the Buddhists, and ended up bringing active compassion to the Zen. Christ was there all along, just under a different name. But the most incredible story was yet to come. It was August 1945, 10 years after Kolbe's departure. An atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki. The Zen monastery where Yamada had spent 40 years meditating was completely destroyed. Most of his disciples died instantly. Yamada survived, wounded, burned, but alive. And in the days that followed the nuclear horror, something miraculous happened. The few surviving Zen monks didn't flee the destroyed city. They didn't take refuge in distant monasteries. They stayed, and they began to care for the bomb victims with a dedication that surprised even foreign doctors. Yamada, his face scarred by burns, spent days carrying bodies, consoling the dying, embracing orphaned children. An American journalist asked him why he hadn't fled like so many others. "A friend taught me that true love doesn't abandon," Yamada replied. "Even when the world is ending." That friend was Kolbe, who at that very moment was in Auschwitz, offering his life in place of a father of a family. Two men, separated by oceans, united by the same understanding. Love that transcends death itself. Kolbe died in August 1941. Yamada died in 1952 from complications of nuclear burns, but both died knowing they had touched the same eternal truth, and that truth continued to spread. In the years that followed, a new form of Buddhism emerged in Japan, more compassionate, more engaged, more connected to the real suffering of the world. The Japanese called it open-hearted Buddhism, and silently they knew that this openness had begun with a Polish priest who planted seeds of infinite love on Zen soil. Today, if you visit Nagasaki, you'll find something few tourists notice. At the site of Yamada's Zen monastery, there's a small commemorative plaque. The bronze is darkened by time and rain. The words are engraved in Japanese and English. Simple, direct. In memory of Master Yamada and all who sought peace through compassion. And next to it, a few meters away, there's a memorial to Maximilian Kolbe, a small stone chapel, clean, austere, with a single window that perfectly frames the site of the Zen monastery. It's no coincidence, and it was intentional. The modern Zen monks of Nagasaki insisted that the two memorials be side by side. They hired the same architect, used the same stone, planted the same type of cherry tree between the two spaces, as if they were two parts of a single poem, two verses of the same song about universal love. Every year, on the anniversary of Kolbe's departure, a silent ceremony takes place there. Zen monks and Catholic priests gather, not to debate theology, not to discuss differences, but to remember that true love knows no boundaries. They sit in a circle, as Yamada and Kolbe did 80 years ago, in respectful silence, each praying in their own tradition, but united by the same fundamental quest, the same thirst for transcendence, the same desire to become transparent to the sacred, as a symbol that true love knows no boundaries, as a reminder that the sacred manifests itself in all traditions that genuinely open themselves to mystery, as testimony that Mugenzai no Sono, the boundless garden, is not just a Zen concept, it's a living reality. accessible to any heart willing to transcend petty differences in the name of infinite love. And now you know why the Japanese wept when Kolbe left. It wasn't a foreigner leaving the country, it was a piece of their own souls being taken away. They had discovered that Buddha and Christ weren't rivals vying for spiritual territory. They were different faces of the same absolute love, and Kolbe had been the bridge that allowed them to see this impossible truth. The boundless garden, Mugenzai no Sono, where all tears are sacred, where all prayers meet, where all true love reveals its universal nature. That's what happens when someone becomes completely transparent to the sacred. The barriers disappear, differences become irrelevant, and only what has always been there remains. Love that knows no bounds, love that makes Zen monks weep, love that makes Catholic saints embrace living Buddhas, love that transforms hearts of stone into boundless gardens. That sound you heard at the beginning, the silent weeping of those monks at the Nagasaki port, it wasn't farewell, it was recognition. The recognition that they had touched something eternal, something that not even atomic bombs could destroy, something that would continue to bloom in every heart, open to the mystery of infinite love. And perhaps that's what the world needs to hear most today. That it doesn't matter how we name the sacred, it doesn't matter in which temple we pray, it doesn't matter what words we use to describe the indescribable. What matters is the quality of our love, the transparency of our surrender, the courage to become bridges between worlds that seem impossible to connect, as Kolbe did, as Yamada learned, as you can do. Because Mugenzai no Sono isn't just the story of an improbable encounter between a priest and Zen monks. It's an invitation for you to create your own boundless garden, wherever you are, with whomever you meet, transcending differences, embracing mysteries, planting seeds of love that sprout far beyond what our eyes can see. And who knows, one day someone will also weep when you leave, not from sadness, but from gratitude, for having touched the eternal through you.